Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of The Democratic View. This afternoon, I do have with us a person who is a resident of our own town of East Hampton, who is extremely knowledgeable and very learned about the pandemic that is going on in our entire country. And he's going to give us a lot of very important information, including the importance of this. His name is Dr. Michael McDonald. And tell us a little bit about your background, so people know.
I'm a doctor of public health, and I've been working on several pandemics for the last 20 to 30 years, and been involved in many epidemics. So I did an interdisciplinary study of medicine at UCSD as an undergraduate, and because I was doing an honors thesis, I was able to work with Jonas Salk at the Salk Institute, who is he was the inventor of the polio vaccine. So
we know him well, Dr. Salk.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's when my fascination with managing infectious disease outbreaks started. And then I did my master's and doctorate at University of California, Berkeley. I ran the Koop Foundation with the former U.S. Surgeon General, C. Everett Koop, and I've been president of Health Initiatives Foundation, Inc. since 1995, so 25 years. And Dr. Koop was he was the founding chairman, along with the Surgeon General of the Air Force as well.
You have to speak a little louder because this muffles your voice, so
Okay.
get it louder. So we have heard a lot of stories about this pandemic and where it started and how it began. And can you give us some specific information about how it really began?
Yeah. So because we run the Global Resilience System, as well as the East End Resilience Network as a nested subsystem of the U.S. Resilience System, the Global Resilience System, we had been tracking the cases even before the Chinese government announced it as an outbreak. But they're in Wuhan in December, the end of December, they announced that there was an outbreak of a novel disease. And that novel disease, we were concerned immediately, from what we were seeing, that it may become a pandemic. And in fact, by January, it was clear that it was already spreading very, very quickly around the world. And because of air travel, now you could have a disease that would have been more contained 200-300 years ago and move slowly. Now it went extremely fast. It was very infectious and it had a rapid translocation, meaning that it could go to other places and spread quickly. So by the time March and April started rolling around, New York became the largest hotspot in the world. And about half the cases in the United States were in New York. And New York became the country with the largest amount of cases. So now we have over 5.5 million cases, confirmed cases, and 175,000 deaths from COVID, direct deaths. But there are other secondary deaths associated. And the confirmed cases are just those that we have confirmation through direct tests, but the actual cases are much higher. Some scientific studies are showing 4 times as many asymptomatic cases as the confirmed tests. And in a jail study recently, they were showing that there were 12 times as many asymptomatic cases or very mild symptoms to those that became clinically ill. So that 5.5 million is probably more like 20 million to 30 million cases, actual infections, and perhaps more.
That is truly mind-boggling, truly. I mean, how something like a disease could have such effect upon the lives of so many people is amazing.
Well, we saw it in 1918. So
yes,
100 years ago, we
yes,
had somewhat of a similar pandemic.
right after World War I.
Yeah, actually, and during World War I as well.
Yeah, it was towards the end of it, yeah. I know there was that flu that did this. And so what do we have to do in order to help ourselves to not get this flu?
Yeah.
Not get this virus, actually.
So the pandemic is extremely complex. There's lots of dimensions to it, and it has a cascading effect that not only does it infect people, and those people, a portion of them will be hospitalized, and some of them will die. But in addition, it will kill a lot of people who no longer can get access to healthcare system because they don't want to go in to do their routine care, and that includes people with heart disease and cancer and so on that really need care and cannot get it. So there are secondary infections. There are also impacts on the social infrastructure and on the economy. So, for example, we had problems with food insecurity, and you couldn't get masks for months, for example. You couldn't get access to the hand sanitizers, for example. But in addition, in some places, the food security began to collapse because the slaughterhouses were all shut down because they became really big sources of infection. And that began to degrade our supply chains. And you couldn't get access to tests for a long time. So there are lots of cascading effects that happen. But if you're just looking at how do you protect yourself, it's a simpler process.
Well, I mean, it is important to know how to protect yourself, particularly if you are, for instance, a mother and head of household and a father, when you have children in the household, you certainly need to know what to do in order to make sure that you provide a safe atmosphere for your children and for yourself.
Right.
So what do we do?
Okay, so the first thing is keep the virus out of your house. So how are you going to do that? For someone who is older, above 60 years old, and it gets progressively higher risk as they get older, you generally want to be able to self-sequester, meaning be in your household and not have others coming into the household that might be infected. And if you do that, then the likelihood of infection is very low. If you still have to deal with getting food, you need to get medicines, so you've got to work out if you now have protected your home, so the virus will not come in, but you have to go out to get food or go to the pharmacy or do other things, then you've got to think about super transmission sites. Where would the virus potentially be that you would be exposed to it? And then you have to manage your relationship within that super transmission site. So you want to wear a mask, for example. Ideally, you want to be wearing some cover on your eyes, because the eyes you can be infected through your eyes. And so there are different ways of doing that. Normal glasses that are large, for example, are one way. This is a type of glass where you've got other cover around the sides, so it really cuts down. And this one is much more protective because it actually has foam, so it dramatically reduces the amount of likelihood of the virus going into your eyes. And there are different kinds of masks that you would want to consider. You would probably want to use hand sanitizers if people are handing you things, and you would want to sanitize material that are coming into the home. But the main transmission is through airborne transmission of the virus from person to person. And so you really have to be careful about going into places that you might be infected, including, for example, restaurants where there are lots of other people in the restaurant. If, for example, you're in a restaurant with 30 other people and it was normally 60 people who would be in that restaurant, given that the virus is airborne, if any of those people were smoking and you could smell the smoke, that means that you also could be inhaling virus. So there's a general rule about 6-foot distance, but in some of the studies, scientific studies about the transmission in restaurants, people have been infected around the table, in other tables throughout the restaurant, because of the airborne nature of the virus. So the longer you're together with other people, like in a workplace or in a restaurant, or in a church or a synagogue, those are places where you're more likely to be infected.
So if you are in a restaurant, let's say, and you are outdoors in that restaurant, and you have, let's say, a table here and then a table maybe 3 or 4 feet away from you, is that acceptable?
So let's say that the other table, the people there are 8 feet away, and it's there's a mild wind. That's relatively safe, okay? Because it allows the virus is dissipated into a very large volume of air, versus in a tight quarter where you might have 30 people in a restaurant and there's no real escape for the virus. It stays airborne within that facility. So being outside is a much lower risk than being inside.
And what about, people who go in, because this is, it's summertime for us right now, and people are, looking for good times and having fun, and so they get takeout from a restaurant. If they eat that takeout in an open area, is that better?
That's generally not a problem. If they've got heated food and they're eating outside, then that should not be a problem as long as people are maintaining a physical distance.
So the problem, the way I see it, it seems as though particularly people like me who are older are very vulnerable to this disease. I can tell you that it is right now August. I have not been to a store since March.
Right.
I have been, my daughter has shopped for me. People have, one daughter orders online for me for things, another daughter goes and gets me fresh stuff, and I haven't been anywhere. This is the first time at LTV that I am somewhere.
Yeah.
So it is really, I guess the most key thing is that you really have to protect yourself. Yeah. And not going places is the bottom line.
Correct. That if you're older and the consequences to you, or you have a comorbidity, people who are obese, people who have diabetes, people who have a respiratory
Those
vulnerability,
underlying conditions of
heart
any
disease, all of those issues are going to make them more likely of having severe illness. And a large portion of the population get COVID and does not actually even have symptoms, or they have very mild symptoms, which might be like a common cold, or might be like the flu, might be a little more serious, but it's not life-threatening. But for some portions of the population, it is lethal. So 175,000 people have died in the United States, and thousands of people have died in Suffolk County. So 2,000 people have died out here. And keep in mind that there's over 600 people today that will be infected in Suffolk County. It's not like it's gone away, but compared to the 10, 12,000 people a day that would have been infected out here earlier in the year, in the April timeframe, for example, when it peaked. We're pretty stable, but we still have virus in the community. And this is why the issue of schools is such a crucial issue, because children, as you probably know, are constantly touching each other. They don't control their space.
I am a retired school teacher and school administrator. If there's one thing I know, it's how children behave.
Yeah.
And they are extremely touching to each other.
Yeah. So schools are super transmission sites. So for a multi-generational household, for example, if your grandchild was going to school and was infected in school and then came into your household, that would put you at much higher risk. Okay, and that's how what we would see is a resurgence in this first wave of the pandemic. And that's what is likely. The probability is going up if the government, if the president designates that teachers are essential and workers, and that the schools have to open so that the children are going to the physical space in an area where they would be transmitting the virus. That increases the probability of the pandemic taking off again.
Well, as a woman who has two granddaughters in school, at school age, and two daughters who are teachers, I don't want anybody going to school.
Yeah.
I really don't.
Yeah.
I mean, I look, and I know what the price the children are paying, because even if you drive around in my neighborhood and I see, some like 8 or 7-year-old kid, they're standing there looking like they're lost because they don't have the socialization that they are used to and that they cherish.
Right.
I mean, children need each other.
Yes.
They're not like adults.
Right.
We're much more able to be self-sufficient, but children are not.
Right.
And it is really difficult.
Well, so here's another way that we can maintain our quality of life and our functional life capacity. First of all, we can maintain physical distance, but still have social connection by using Zoom and telephone calls and FaceTime and so on, Facebook and so on.
Yes.
So luckily, we're at a time when we can stay connected, and humans need to be connected to each other. We know that social cohesion and the amount of connectedness between people as they get older, that dramatically increases their ability to remain healthy. So if we can stay socially connected, and one of the things that we've been working with in the Resilient American Communities COVID-19 initiative is to increase the friendship networks. So friendship circles where people will call each other each day. So women, for example, that have lost their husbands, they would call each other and make sure that they've got their medications, that they've got food enough in the house, and everything's going well. They're asking about how family have come to visit them, and do they have any symptoms of upper respiratory illness or whatever. So that's the family circle. Then connecting, what we've been doing, for example, in Clearwater, is we've been holding weekly Zoom calls and looking, has anybody gotten sick in the neighborhood? Is there any indication that we've got increased risk? Are people wearing their masks? Are they, when they go to the marina or the beach, are they exhibiting behavior that's violating social distance? And so that as a neighborhood, we're creating a culture.
I'm in the same neighborhood, by the way.
Yes. So, and we don't have any indigenous infections in Clearwater, as far as I know, and I've been pretty connected to people. But people have come in and then sequestered from the city and been sick, but they didn't infect anybody, and that's okay. But in the Springs, we've had a lot of cases, but that's been with more vulnerable populations of essential workers, and we know that generally around the United States, Black and Hispanic populations have been more likely to get sick, partly because they're essential workers and their housing conditions are not as good, and the multi-generational families.
And they don't have the medical care.
And the access to good medical care is a factor.
Yeah. Wow. That's, so if I'm talking about going to the beach, if I'm walking to go for a swim and I'm, let's say, going on a sandy area to get to that water, and I want to sit down in the open air, that's fairly safe.
It is. So we can maintain a high quality of life here. We can maintain our functional life capacity because of all of the ability to have digital communications and so on. And in reality, our life here is much better than what life was like in these high rises where a lot of people were getting infected like they were getting infected in cruise ships. So we have enough space. We've got a beautiful environment. There's lots of physical activity we can do, like biking or going to the beach, go swimming, go sailing. All of those things we're not restricted on that are quite safe and healthy.
Well, that's important for all of us to know. For instance, I have also two granddaughters, and they have been each other's pal, and one actually came from the city a couple of weeks ago, and she's pals with somebody who goes in Springs and goes to spring school. And they've been with each other. I must say they make a mess in my house, but it's okay, because what we have to do is give them the opportunity to be with each other and to be social. Yeah. Because as I had mentioned to you previously, I sometimes drive around, going from one place to another, and I see a kid standing there on the front lawn looking out, and that kid is just dying to be with another kid. Yeah. And it breaks my heart as a teacher and school administrator. I say, oh my God, this kid needs other kids. Yeah. And that's such an important part of their lives.
So this is key. If we can build friendship circles where that friendship circle, the parents really know what's going on in terms of connectivity with others, and that they've been sequestered as a group, then a group of 12 teenagers that are only interacting within their group, that's probably going to be fine as long as they've been self-sequestered out here, because the infection rate is very low. But if you add somebody who's come in from Florida where there's a high infection rate, for example, into that group, they could rapidly infect the group if they are COVID positive. So we've got to think about friendship circles to maintain our social connectedness. We have to think about trust networks so that we can get a sense of these larger neighborhoods that we're protecting not only our homes, but we're protecting our neighborhood. And then we've got to think about the super transmission sites where could people from our neighborhood go within the community in a place where tourists are coming through to go to the beaches and then potentially infecting people in those super transmission sites.
Wow. It's really, I mean, it's really very important. And, you know, I was just thinking about one of the things about people coming into your home. I mean, what if you need something like a plumber or an electrician for some problem that you're having? You have to be pretty careful.
Well, so there, as much as you can keep the doors and windows open, or with screens perhaps, or otherwise, where there's a lot of air exchange, that's important. We've actually, when we had workers in, taken plastic and closed off areas where they're working, and then air that area out, and then you can go back into that area over time. So there are ways of doing it. You have to be smart about how you would contain the virus in those circumstances.
Well, thank you very much for all of this information, but we will go on and do more about this, because this is extremely important.
Yeah, pleasure.
I mean, really, this is, I guess I could say, this is a matter of life and death, because it really is.
It is, but we've got a healthy culture out here, and we can contain the virus.
That's right. Yeah. Amazing. When you think of a virus as just being a piece of genetic material with a protein coat. Pretty powerful, though.
Yes.
Pretty powerful.
But if we can resist through our behavior and our social connections,